Trade with Israeli settlements, which we have now formally declared to be part of the Palestinian state, must now stop, and our government must reconsider its position on the Occupied Territories Bill. Failure by the international community to impose sanctions has created Israeli ability to act with impunity and led to this catastrophic situation. We now urge the Irish government to take leadership on sanctions. Failure to do so will see the continuation of Israel's impunity.
Thank you. Now I call on Mrs. Citrin, Government Delegate of Israel, to take the floor. Now I call on Mrs. Grossi, Workers Delegate from Italy, to take the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, distinguished guests, Director General. I take the floor on behalf of the Italian Trade Union Confederations, CGIL, CISL and UIL. The ILO DG report on the situation of workers in the occupied Palestinian territories portrays an appalling reality that demands the strongest condemnation, especially after October the 7th. Italian trade unions reiterate their condemnation of the Hamas terrorist attack, but also the disproportionate military response promoted by the Israeli ultra-nationalist government that has killed more than 35,000 Palestinians, including more than 14,000 children since that day. More than 77,000 civilians have been wounded, and over 2.3 million have been forcibly displaced, and the provision of essential aid to civilians severely disrupted. The International Court of Justice has held that it is plausible that Israel is committing acts of genocide in Gaza and requested immediate and decisive action. The severe livelihoods and human loss, the estimated generational traumas and social costs of the 75-year-long occupation and violation of human rights are having devastating effects on workers, trade unions and communities. Italian trade unions believe that it is only through effective enforcement of international law that the world can restore peace and put a definitive end to these and many more massacres that thrive on the deliberate disregard of international law. As reiterated in the conclusions of the DG report, peace is feasible but cannot be achieved without an end to the occupation and without international engagement. It is urgent now to foster initiatives which allow progress towards a fully independent, viable and sovereign Palestinian state. Italian trade unions support the recognition of Palestinian state following the path taken recently by Spain, Norway, Ireland, Slovenia joining the group of 143 UN member states that recognize Palestine as a sovereign state based on UN resolutions. Italian trade union also call for an immediate and permanent ceasefire and welcome the Italian government and the EU decisions to refund UNRWA. We call on all governments to join and support the ILO Fund to promote a swift recovery and rebuilding of the socio-economic infrastructure in the occupied Palestinian territories. Italian trade unions finally also urge the ILO to engage all tripartite constituents into promoting world disarmament for the full achievement of ILO Recommendation 205. The war industry must be defunded and reconverted, and the ILO should play an active role in promoting reconversion efforts. Thank you.
I want to call on Mrs. Osman, Government Delegate of Malaysia, to take the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Malaysia takes note of the Director General's report on the dire situation of workers of the occupied Arab territories. It is deeply regrettable that the ILO report yet again illustrates the solemn truth of the precarious situation of the Palestinian people. The Israeli regime's relentless, merciless and deliberate genocidal actions against the Palestinians violate the ruling by the International Court of Justice and has brought unimaginable destruction that lead the already fragile Palestinian labor market to further collapse. The international community must hold Israel accountable for its actions and ensure that the rights of Palestinian workers are respected. Palestinian workers deserve to enjoy the same rights as everyone else as provided by the international labor standards and ILO fundamental principles. Mr. Chair, Given the severe depletion of resource due to the war, the international community's support in this regard is of utmost crucial to rebuild and enhance the Palestinian economy's human capital. Without this support, the long-term recovery and sustainable development of self-sufficient Palestinian labour market will remain unattainable. To this end, Malaysia calls for the National Employment Strategy 2021 to 2025 to be reviewed to accommodate new needs in the Palestinian labour market following the devastation in Gaza and its impact on the West Bank. Malaysia earnestly hopes that the ILO will continue to support reinforcing the decent work agenda and social justice for all Palestinians during this critical time, albeit facing unprecedented challenges and constraints due to the unrelenting attacks and severely deteriorating situation. Malaysia also calls on new and renewed funding from donors to sustain the ILO's activities in the occupied Palestinian territories to yield positive outcomes towards the enhancement of employment and livelihood opportunities for Palestinian workers and their families. Mr. Chair, Malaysia supports Palestinians' commitment to have close cooperation with the ILO in various initiatives and believes that this will pave the way forward in strengthening Palestine's national capacities. Malaysia firmly believes that development cooperation, technical assistance and capacity building provided by the ILO and international partners remain crucial and should continue to be strengthened to mitigate and assist the Palestinian labour sector. However, these efforts can only succeed with an immediate cessation of hostilities and a permanent ceasefire. Chair, Malaysia reiterates its unwavering support for the establishment of an independent and sovereign state of Palestine based on pre-1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital, as well as the admission of Palestine as a full member of the United Nations. To conclude, Chair, Malaysia supports the concluding observations and recommendations stated in paragraphs 172 to 189 of the Director General's report. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I now invite Mr. O'Connor, Workers' Delegate of Ireland, to take the floor.
Mr. President, it is an honour to speak to this 44th report of the Director General on the situation of workers of the occupied Arab territories on behalf of the workers of Ireland. It is crucial that this House, so committed to social justice, retains a focus on what is happening in the occupied territories, especially at a time which the report correctly calls a catastrophic situation. Since the horrific attacks by Hamas on October the 7th, the Israeli response has killed more than 36,000 Palestinians in Gaza, including women and children, injured and maimed thousands more, and traumatised the whole population. The education and health sectors are destroyed and livelihoods are shattered. Unemployment is at an all-time high. All of this is imposed on a population that has been subjected to a 17-year blockade by land, air and sea. Over the years, reports of the GG have noted how laws applied in the West Bank and East Jerusalem systematically discriminate against Palestinians. This is clearly a system of apartheid, as human rights groups, including in Israel itself, have concluded. The report draws attention to the international law context of the situation, including unprecedented rulings by the ICJ that Israel has a prima facie case to answer under the Genocide Convention. Further rulings have since been issued calling on Israel to halt the attacks on Rafah, and applications for arrest warrants have been filed at the ICC. All have been ignored by the Government of Israel. Mr. President, in a very welcome move, our government recently recognised the State of Palestine, an important affirmation of the Palestinian people's right to self-determination and sovereignty. We also welcome our government's request with the Government of Spain for a review of the EU-Israel Association Agreement and the decision of the EU to convene a meeting of the EU-Israel Association Council to assess compliance with its human rights obligations. Trade with Israeli settlements, which we have now formally declared to be part of the Palestinian state, must now stop, and our government must reconsider its position on the Occupied Territories Bill. Failure by the international community to impose sanctions has created Israeli ability to act with impunity and led to this catastrophic situation. We now urge the Irish Government to take leadership on sanctions. Failure to do so will see the continuation of Israel's impunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I call on Mrs. Citrin, Government Delegate of Israel, to take the floor.
Good afternoon. It is odd that my country is the topic of discussion, yet we are not considered a concerned country for the purpose of this debate. Indeed, when half the forum leaves during the discussion.